Elite Facts presents the strangest deaths that all have links to Scientology. 1. Sean Lonsdale was a longtime enemy of Scientology. The church moved into his hometown and he wasn't pleased. He often picketed and demonstrated outside their offices and always felt the brunt of their sheer numbers. The church dug deep into Lonsdale's past and found he had 2 convictions, both misdemeanors related to having sex with men in public. Using that information, the church plastered flyers around town with Lonsdale's mugshot and also called his landlord and his employer and told him that he was a religious bigot who was possibly dangerous. On February 16, 2008, neighbors called the police to report a terrible odor coming from Lonsdale's house. The police entered the house and found Lonsdale, who was age 39, dead. There was a garden hose leading from his car into the house, and his death was ruled a suicide. 2. Patrice Vic of Lyon received a brochure about Scientology that convinced him to give it a try. He was involved with them for a short time, and even though Nellie, his wife, thought that the group was harassing them, Patrice agreed to meet with Jean-Jacques Mazier, the head of the Lyon chapter. While at the meeting, Mazier pressured Patrice to do a purification treatment for 30,000 francs. Mazier kept insisting that Patrice go through with it, even suggesting that they take out a bank loan if they didn't have the money. Nellie refused and the couple returned home and continued to bicker. Throughout the night, Patrice tossed and turned until about 5 a.m. Then the father of 2 got out of bed, said, "Don't stop me, it's the only way," and jumped out the window of the family's 12th floor apartment. He did not survive the fall. 8 years later, Mazier and 22 other members of the church were charged in connection with the death. The church slammed the trial, saying that Scientology, which is considered a cult in France, was on trial and that the trial was a sham. Nevertheless, Mazier was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and given 18 months in prison. 3. Quentin Hubbard was the eldest son of L. Ron Hubbard. He chose Quentin to be his successor as the leader of Scientology. Quentin, however, didn't really take Scientology seriously, even though he had risen to be one of the top-ranking members. When Quentin was 22, he apparently said that the practices his dad came up with didn't work and that he had just faked the results. Quentin also said he thought that his father was crazy. Saying something like this was one of the worst things that you could do in the church, even if you were the son of the leader. And Quentin was told he would have to hand over his credentials and start all over again. That night, Quentin disappeared from a Scientology compound. He left behind a rambling note about UFOs and said he was going to Area 51 in Nevada to fly spy planes. 300 operatives from the church's Guardian Office, a Scientology organization that is compared to the CIA and the KGB, were sent to find him. On October 28th, the Las Vegas police found a white Pontiac without license plates. The young man was unconscious inside. The engine was still running and there was a tube going from the exhaust pipe into the car. He stayed in a coma until November 12th when he finally passed away. 4. Teresa Duncan and her boyfriend Jeremy Blake were well-respected artists and bloggers who lived in New York. They both began acting paranoid for no apparent reason, and they claimed that they were being terrorized by Scientologists. Blake had designed an album cover for the famous Scientologist Beck. It was during this time that the couple started to talk more about Scientology and Beck's new movie. According to emails from Duncan to a friend, Beck apparently wanted to use the movie in New York to get away from the Los Angeles-centric Church of Scientology. With their lives seemingly out of control, Blake found Duncan's lifeless body in their apartment on July 10. She had overdosed on over-the-counter medication. A week to the day after Duncan's death, Blake went to Rockaway Beach in Queens, undressed, and walked into the Atlantic Ocean. A business card was found saying, "I am going to join the lovely Teresa." His body was found 5 days later. 5. Edward McBride was training to be a Special Forces commando with the Australian Army when he decided to withdraw in 2005. Around that same time, McBride was getting heavily involved in Scientology. In 2006, McBride took out a $20,000 bank loan to pay for 3 classes. By the time he finished the classes, he was going to church 3 nights a week and all day on Saturday. He was also going through the auditing process. The last part of the process involved being measured by an electropsychometer, or an E-meter. This is a low-level electrical reader that, according to Scientologists, detects changes in the human psyche. On February 7, 2007, 2 days after finishing the auditing process and the day before the E-meter test, McBride, who was a trained electrician, threw a rope over an electrical tower and caused a 110,000-volt charge to surge through his body. The explosion was so strong that it left burn marks 10 meters away. When piecing McBride's final hours together, the state coroner asked the Church of Scientology for the files on McBride, but they refused and shipped the files to the United States. What the coroner did find out was that in the last 48 hours of his life, McBride had been called or texted 19 times by members of the church. The police said that many of the calls were forceful in nature, demanding that he return for the final test and saying that L. Ron Hubbard would not approve of his actions. The police wanted to know what difference it would make if he postponed it for a day. The Church of Scientology denied any wrongdoing in McBride's death, and the church was never charged in connection with the death. 6. Alexander Genshin's father became Scientology Chief of International Affairs in 1985. His relationship with the leader of the church, David Miscavige, was apparently rocky. Over the years, he had fallen out of favor with Miscavige and was forced to go to The Hole. The Hole is described as an office prison with bars on the windows and the doors, where 60 to 100 executives, both male and female, are forced to stay all day and all night. They only leave the room to go to the showers. On the night of July 1, 2012, the 27-year-old Alexander went to bed at his in-laws' home. The next morning, they noticed him sleeping in the bed but didn't see him get up. 12 hours later, at 9 p.m., they saw that he was still motionless in bed. He was discovered unresponsive the next morning. Instead of getting help right away, his father-in-law drove a child to school, returned home, and then finally called 911. Alexander was taken to the hospital and pronounced dead. Members of the church were told, before the coroner had even finished investigating, that Alexander had died from a reaction to a prescribed painkiller. The official cause of death was listed as a combination of methadone and pneumonia. What's so strange about Alexander's death is that the church tried to keep it a secret. 7. In 1970, Susan Meister joined the Church of Scientology and seemed to be happy. She got more involved, and in 1971, she went to live on their ship, the Apollo. On June 25, 1971, Susan apparently shot herself. Her father, George Meister, flew to Morocco to find out more information. When he went to the church, they refused to show him his daughter's body. Instead, they only showed him a picture. She had died from a gunshot wound in the middle of her forehead, and on her chest, the gun was clutched in both hands. George said that it would not have been possible for Susan to shoot herself in the middle of the forehead and still hold on to the gun with both hands on her chest. He returned home after 4 days without seeing his daughter's body, and for the next several months, he and the church fought over Susan's body. Her body was not shipped back to the United States until December of 1971. After being shipped home, an official from the church offered George a settlement, and George rejected it. He thought it was odd that the Church of Scientology would make him an offer, because if Susan's death was just a suicide as they claimed, why would they need to make a settlement? After George rejected the settlement, he said that he and his wife started getting threatening phone calls, saying that they were going to get the same thing their daughter got. 8. In 1981, Michelle Barnett, a longtime Scientologist, married David Miscavige, the leader of the church. On September 8, 1985, Michelle's mother and David's mother-in-law, Flo Barnett, were found shot to death. She had been shot 3 times with a long-range rifle, twice in the chest and once in the head. Despite the number of gunshot wounds, the death was ruled a suicide, which is a baffling conclusion considering that the 51-year-old woman would have had to have shot herself 3 times with a long-range rifle. 9. Scientology is dead against psychiatric help, which includes medication. This really hinders the mentally disturbed members of the church. It was Australia where incidents of this kind boiled over, involving Frank Petrovic, a member who the church evaluated and said it hit rock bottom. In December, Vitkovich walked into a post office and tried to shoot his one-time friend. The gun jammed and his target escaped. 8 others weren't so lucky and were killed. Not long after the killings, he jumped to his death. The coroner claimed that Scientology was to blame for the murders, and that the member who told Vitkovich that he was at rock bottom pushed him over the edge, all in an attempt to get him to pay for their classes. 10. Another incident happened in late 2006. Linda Walicki was diagnosed with mental illness, but her devout Scientologist parents wouldn't let her get psychiatric help. Instead, the church sent them drugs. Walicki later stabbed her 15-year-old sister and her father to death and injured her mother as well. Walicki was found covered in blood wandering around the neighborhood. 11. The Fort Harrison Hotel is an exclusive Scientology hotel. It's a high-level training center and the spiritual headquarters of the church. The church bought the hotel secretly in 1975, and since then, it has witnessed a number of unusual deaths. The most notable one is that of Lisa McPherson. McPherson had been a Scientologist for 18 years when, in September of 1995, after $175,000 of Scientology counseling, she was declared clear. On November 18th of 1995, McPherson was involved in a minor car accident. After the collision, she got out of the car, took off her clothes, and said she needed help. She was taken to a psychiatric hospital but signed out a short time later against doctor's orders. She was taken back to the hotel where a woman named Janice Johnson was put in charge of her care. But Johnson didn't have a license to practice medicine in Florida. 17 days later, McPherson's health was much worse, so the people who were caring for her took her to a hospital where a Scientologist doctor worked. When the doctor saw McPherson, she was bruised, looked unkempt, and wasn't breathing. The doctor pronounced her dead. There was no obituary or police report. The church just quietly buried the body. 11 days later, news of McPherson's death leaked out. Officials at the church said that McPherson had come for rest and relaxation and then suddenly fell ill. The medical examiner said that wasn't possible and that she would have been showing signs of dehydration 5 days before her death. In fact, she probably was not responsive 24 hours before she was pronounced dead. The family sued the church, and the state's attorney's office opened an 11-month investigation. The church was initially charged with 2 felonies. In the end, McPherson's family and the church settled for an undisclosed sum, and the charges against the church were dropped. Thanks for watching another amazing video, folks. Subscribe for more from Elite Facts.